Imagine being surrounded by your own neighbors, not in celebration but in judgment, as a rubber tire soaked in gasoline is forced over your shoulders. No trial, no mercy, just fire. This wasn't a relic of ancient cruelty. It was a weapon of fear in modern-day Africa. Imagine this. A hot afternoon in Soweto. The air is thick with dust, with sweat, with something else. Tension. A crowd gathers fast, moving like a tide. They're shouting, accusations. A young man is dragged into the open. He pleads, cries. Someone steps forward with a car tire, another with a jerry can of petrol. And before you can look away, the tire is around his chest, his arms pinned. His body was doused. A match is struck. And in seconds, he is ablaze, alive, screaming. And yet, no one moves to help. This was not just a killing, it was a message, a performance, a firestorm of political fury. You've just witnessed necklacing, one of the most terrifying punishments born not from kings or inquisitors, but from a people at war with themselves, with oppression, and with the unbearable weight of injustice. But how did it come to this? Why would communities suffocating under apartheid turn to such gruesome spectacles? And who decided this was justice? Stay with me. We're going deeper than you ever imagined. This story isn't ancient. It doesn't come from a dusty scroll or a forgotten battlefield. It comes from within living memory. The 1980s and 1990s. South Africa, Zimbabwe, Haiti, Nigeria. Torn by civil strife, colonial legacies, authoritarian regimes, and betrayal. It was a world where enemies didn't always wear uniforms, and where the line between hero and traitor was sometimes drawn in gasoline and fire. This is a story of politics, fear, rage, and what happens when justice is handed to the crowd. And in this video, we're going to uncover it all. We'll explore how necklacing emerged. We'll break down its gruesome mechanics, physically, psychologically, and politically, and we'll ask the haunting question: when the law is a tool of oppression, what replaces it? Ready? Let's begin. Where there's smoke, the birth of necklacing. Close your eyes for a moment. Not too far in the past, barely a few generations ago, the winds across Africa carried more than just heat and dust. They carried the cries of revolution, the chants of liberation, and beneath that, a smoldering fury. From the dusty alleys of Soweto to the humid streets of Port-au-Prince, entire nations were boiling under the weight of dictatorship, apartheid, and colonial ghosts that refused to die. But let's be clear, this wasn't just politics. This was personal. The earliest whispers of necklacing began to take shape in South Africa during the height of apartheid, a brutal system of racial segregation where the white minority ruled through violence and fear. The government controlled the courts, the police, and the media. But the townships? Those were different. In the townships, black South Africans lived lives stripped of dignity, curfews, passbooks, poverty, humiliation. So, who do you turn to when the very system meant to protect you is designed to destroy you? You turn to yourselves, to each other, to the mob. And that's where necklacing emerged, not as a state punishment, but as a people's justice. Brutal, public, final. In a world where informants, known as impimpus, could be anyone, trust became a rare currency. A wrong word whispered to the wrong person could mean a midnight arrest, a family disappearance, a death behind bars that no one would ever explain. So when suspicions rose, when was someone accused of helping the regime? When a face was seen too many times near the police station? That's when the crowd surged forward. When a single tire was lifted like a sentence. When the chant, fierce and final, rang out across the street, "Necklace him!" And suddenly, the accused was no longer a neighbor. He was a symbol, a warning, a burning reminder. The term necklacing might sound almost poetic, like jewelry. But this was no ornament. It referred to the act of placing a rubber tire, soaked in petrol, around a person's chest and arms, often forcing their elbows tight against their ribs, then setting them alight. The name originated in South Africa during the 1980s and soon spread to other parts of the continent and beyond. But how did such a gruesome act gain acceptance? How did this become not only tolerated, but sometimes celebrated? Here's where it gets complicated. Necklacing was never just about punishment. It was about control. It was about spectacle. And in the twisted logic of rebellion, it was about unity. Liberation movements, like the African National Congress, ANC, and Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC, sometimes walked a tightrope between condemning violence and turning a blind eye to it. While high-ranking leaders often disavowed such killings publicly, grassroots movements sometimes saw them as necessary evils, even tools of deterrence. Bishop Desmond Tutu, a Nobel Peace Prize winner and fierce anti-apartheid voice, once said, "We must not be just anti-apartheid. We must also be anti-injustice wherever it rears its head." And yet, even he struggled to speak against necklacing without alienating the very people he aimed to protect. Because how do you criticize those who've been brutalized for generations without seeming like a traitor yourself? Necklacing wasn't just physical torture, it was psychological warfare. Imagine living in a township where whispers could get you killed. Being seen at the wrong time, in the wrong place, could mean a public death as your neighbors watched, as your friends turned their heads, as children screamed, and parents stayed silent. This was more than fear. It was paralysis. A population suspended in suspicion, rage, and silence. And the worst part? In many cases, the accused were never proven guilty. What would you do if the courts won't help you, if the police were your enemies, if your brother disappeared because someone whispered your name? Would you stay silent, or would you join the crowd? If you're finding this story eye-opening, even disturbing, let us know in the comments below. This is a dark corner of history that many have never heard of. Subscribe for more haunting, hidden truths from our past. And keep watching, because what's coming next will chill you even further. Necklacing didn't stay in South Africa. In the 1990s, it appeared in the chaotic streets of Haiti, used by armed mobs and vigilantes to target alleged criminals and political opponents. In Nigeria, reports of jungle justice carried similar scenes. No judge, no trial, just fire. The method had spread, not through ideology, but through anger. A language of violence that crossed borders with frightening ease. And yet, in many cases, the targets weren't dictators or soldiers. They were neighbors. They were women. They were teenagers. Because in every witch hunt, the line between guilt and accusation gets thinner and thinner, until it burns away entirely. A shout rings out, another, then another. Impimpi. Spy! Burn him! The atmosphere turns electric. No one steps back, because stepping back might mean suspicion. And suspicion, in this place, at this time, is as deadly as guilt. This is the anatomy of a necklacing. A killing unlike any other, not just designed to eliminate, but to expose, to break the body, to scorch the soul, to show everyone else what happens when you're labeled the enemy. Let's walk through what happens moment by moment. But be warned, once seen, these images never leave you. It begins with the tire, rubber, heavy, reeking of old oil and neglect. You've seen them on cars, on roads, but here they're instruments of death. The victim is often beaten first, not to kill, to weaken, disorient, and strip them. Then the tire is forced around the chest and shoulders, trapping the arms, not just to prevent escape, but to bind the person into submission. Next comes the petrol, sometimes diesel, sometimes lighter fluid, poured over the head, down the chest, soaking the victim. Clothing becomes a fuse, hair becomes kindling, the air becomes poisonous. The victim may scream, beg, deny the accusation, cry out to God, to the crowd, to family, anyone. But by now the mob is too far gone. They don't hear a person anymore. They hear a message, a match, a lighter, a spark. In an instant, the body becomes an inferno. Flames wrap around the victim's face, skin bubbles, eyes boil. The scream, at first high and piercing, turns guttural. The animal, then nothing. It's not instant. That's the most harrowing part. It can take minutes. Endless, choking, screaming minutes. The rubber melts into the flesh. The lungs collapse. The brain fries. And the crowd, they watch, sometimes cheering, sometimes silent, sometimes filming, later, in the 2000s, with cell phones. It's execution as a spectacle, as performance, as a warning. Let's pause. Here's what Archbishop Desmond Tutu said during the rise of necklacing in South Africa. If we are going to accuse others of injustice, we must clean our own house. But the house was already on fire. Journalist Peter Godwin once described a necklacing in Zimbabwe as a bonfire with a soul inside. The sound, not just screaming, but the kind of sound you never forget. Not human, not an animal, just raw pain turned to smoke. Even the African National Congress at times couldn't fully control the fire. One ANC leaflet warned, "Beware of impimpus, they are everywhere. Community justice will find them." The leaflet didn't endorse necklacing, but it didn't condemn it either. We don't have many first-hand accounts from survivors, because almost no one survived. But forensic analysts later described the injuries as among the most extreme forms of torture-induced death. Burns covered 90 to 100% of the body. In some cases, death didn't occur from the fire, but from asphyxiation, panic, or internal organ collapse. Think about that. You might die before the fire kills you, simply from fear or from your lungs seizing shut. It wasn't just death, and it was obliteration. And yet people watched, not in hiding, not in shame, in daylight, in public. Why? Because they believed it meant something. This is where it becomes more terrifying, not less. Because necklacing wasn't done in back alleys, it was done in the open, so people could see. And when people see horror enough times, it becomes normal. Psychologists call this desensitization. Sociologists call it ritual violence. But here's what it really means. The first time a necklacing happens, people are horrified. By the 10th time, they're clapping. By the 100th, they're participating. And suddenly the act isn't just violence, it's identity. To be part of the resistance, to stand against traitors, to cleanse the community, even if that means watching a man burn alive. Would you watch? Would you turn away? Would you speak up? Or would you say nothing, just like so many others? But what happens next? What about the families left behind? The communities shaped by that violence? What scars remain, not just on the ground, but in the hearts of those who watched? Ashes and echoes, the legacy of necklacing in modern Africa. The sky is gray, the crowd is gone. And where once there was a man, there is now only a blackened outline on the earth. Charred rubber, scorched bone. The smell lingers, even after the fire dies. But the flames didn't just consume the victim. They scorched everything around it. Memory, identity, justice. Long after the smoke drifted into the sky, the echoes remained. This chapter is not about fire. It's about what happens when the fire ends, about what burns inside the people who watched, the families who lost, the nations that allowed it. Let's talk about the legacy. South Africa transitioned to democracy in 1994. Apartheid fell. Nelson Mandela became president. The world cheered. But in the townships, wounds didn't vanish. They festered. There were no statues for the necklaces, no plaques for the falsely accused. Only whispers. Entire families disappeared from history, not because they died, but because no one dared remember them. And for those who watched, they buried what they saw. Deep, too deep. Because to speak of it was to confess, and to confess was to risk being next. After apartheid ended, South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed. It was meant to heal, to allow victims and perpetrators to share their stories, ask forgiveness, and find closure. But here's the truth. Many necklacing cases never reached the TRC because necklacing wasn't ordered by the generals. It was carried out by neighbors, friends, sometimes children. One mother testified that her 16-year-old son was necklaced because he was suspected of talking to a white policeman. No evidence, no chance to explain. They called it justice, she said through tears. But what they did, it wasn't justice, it was madness. The commission tried. But how do you untangle that kind of trauma? How do you heal a country where everyone was both victim and accomplice? Let's not forget the ones who survived. Not the victims, but the witnesses. A study by South African mental health organizations in the early 2000s found elevated PTSD levels among adults who grew up in the townships during the necklacing era. Many experienced recurring nightmares, flashbacks, paranoia. One man, interviewed anonymously, said, "I saw my brother burn. We thought he was a spy. I don't even know if he was. But we shouted too. We helped. I can't live with that." Imagine carrying that throughout your entire life. Not only grief, but guilt. Necklacing didn't just destroy bodies. It shattered psyches. Entire communities learned to live with silence, and silence corrodes. Necklacing wasn't unique to South Africa. We've said it before, but it bears repeating. In Haiti during the 1990s, necklacing became known as Paix le Brun. Named after a tire company, it was used to punish supposed enemies of the people. In Nigeria, it surfaced during periods of mob justice, and even in modern-day Kenya, vigilante killings with burning tires still make headlines. In each case, the pattern is the same. A failed justice system, a desperate population, and a desire to show power, not through verdicts, but through violence. In the digital age, necklacing took on a new, even more disturbing layer. It was filmed. Videos, often grainy, shaking, terrifying, surfaced online. A man kneels. He's surrounded. A tire is forced over him, gasoline, flames, and you hear it, laughter, cheering, phones recording. We now live in a world where executions are not just punishments, but content. And here's the twisted irony. Some of these videos go viral, not because people care, but because people are curious. Violence becomes entertainment. Torture becomes clickbait. And necklacing? It becomes part of the internet's underbelly, passed around with emojis and memes, stripped of context, of humanity. That is its most haunting legacy. Ask yourself something difficult. When you hear about violence in another country and another culture, do you judge it? Or do you try to understand where it comes from? Would you have been any different if you lived in a world with no justice, no voice, no escape? These questions aren't meant to excuse. They're meant to challenge, because history isn't just a record of what happened. It's a mirror. And sometimes it shows us things we'd rather not see. South Africa today is not perfect. Corruption still exists. Inequality is rampant. And in many townships, the ghosts of the past linger like fog. But change has happened. Voices once silenced have spoken. Wounds have been acknowledged, if not yet fully healed. Activists have called for remembrance days, for monuments, not of bronze but of truth, to say, we did this, we must never do it again. Because forgetting, that's where it begins again. Burning justice, what necklacing teaches us about humanity. Close your eyes and listen. Not to crackling rubber, but to the low hum of a crowd. That sound isn't just in Africa or the 1980s. It's wherever anger outpaces reason, wherever fear demands a scapegoat. And if you tilt your head, you'll hear it in our own streets, our own comment sections, our own hearts. Because necklacing isn't only history, it's a warning label on the human condition. We've walked through sparks and smoke, through accusation and execution, through ashes that refuse to settle. Now we ask the hardest question of all. Why did we ever let it happen, and could we let it happen again? The anatomy of collective rage. A mob is never empty-handed. Give a frightened crowd a stone, and they'll throw it. Give them a tire and a match, and history shows they may light it. But the object is less important than the permission they feel. Psychologists call it diffusion of responsibility. When many share the guilt, no one feels they own it. The us versus them shortcut. Apartheid engineered a brutal hierarchy, white versus black, state versus subject. Necklacing created another, loyal versus traitor. Simpler lines, faster judgments. Every era draws its own divisions, political party, religion, tribe, and online fandom. The tighter the circle of us, the quicker someone outside becomes expendable. Fear as fuel? It wasn't bloodlust alone that kept the tire factories busy. It was fear. Fear that the person next to you was an informant. Fear that if you hesitated, you'd be branded soft, or worse, complicit. Mob violence turns terror outward. Better he burn than we be betrayed. Mirrors in the modern world. The digital pyre. Today, a viral hashtag can destroy reputations in hours. Lives are canceled, doxxed, piled under digital rubber, doused with retweets. The victim screams are comment threads. The flames are trending topics. Different medium, same mechanics. Accusation, outrage, erasure. Question for you. Have you ever shared a rumor because everyone else had already clicked send? That's the first flick of the lighter. When justice goes DIY. Across the globe, overburdened courts push communities to vigilante shortcuts. In parts of Latin America, suspected bike thieves are beaten to death on busy roads. In rural India, WhatsApp rumors spark lynchings before dawn. In American cities, flash mob assaults erupt from smartphone whispers. Each incident claims to serve justice. Each bypasses every safeguard civilization built to keep punishment from becoming performance. Propaganda in HD. 1980s township pamphlets urged crowds to punish impimpus. Now algorithms serve up ever sharper outrage loops, curated fear, recommended fury. It took days for a rumor to spread in Soweto. It takes seconds on TikTok. Technology hasn't outgrown the tire. It has turbocharged it. Voices from the firebreak. Survivors who chose mercy. Not everyone joined the chant. Some risked bullets to pull tires off strangers. Nomboniso Gasa, an activist then only 17, once shielded a suspected informer with her own body. "If we win freedom by burning children," she later said, "we inherit ashes, not a country." The pastor with a garden hose. In Port-au-Prince, Father Jean-Baptiste ran toward a flaming man with nothing but a leaking hose pipe. He saved little of the victim's skin, but enough of his life for testimony. That testimony cleared 5 falsely accused neighbors. 1 garden hose outweighed 1 mob. Lessons hidden in ash. Every account of someone refusing to light the match proves a crucial point. Conscience hurts, but it burns far less than rubber on human skin. History rewards the hesitators. How do we stop the next tire? Rebuild trust, brick by brick. Where courts fail, crowds rule. Investment in fair policing, transparent trials, and fast appeals may sound bureaucratic, but they're fireproof walls against mob rule. Teach the anatomy of rumor. Schools in post-genocide Rwanda run classes on critical listening, spotting exaggeration, questioning anonymous tips. A tire cannot ignite where skepticism soaks the ground. Memorialize, don't mythologize. Germany's Stolperstein, stumbling stones, embed Holocaust victims' names underfoot, forcing pedestrians to glance down and remember. South Africa debates a similar program. Bronze tires set in sidewalks, each inscribed with a necklacing victim's name. Horror acknowledged is horror disarmed. Slow the social feed. Several countries now test friction buttons on messaging apps. If you forward a post more than 5 times, the platform asks, "Do you trust this?" A digital breath mint for mobile halitosis, a human heart on trial. Imagine a seesaw. On one side, revulsion, every cell screaming never again. On the other, temptation, the primitive lure of belonging, of judging, of cleansing by fire. Civilization is the pivot. Shift your weight wisely. You've just stared into humanity's furnace and watched how quickly justice melts into cruelty. So here's your challenge. Speak up when a rumor becomes a rallying cry. Share this video, but share it thoughtfully, with a note on why the story matters today. Comment below. Have you witnessed modern mobs, digital or real, and what stopped you from joining in? If this deep dive opened your eyes, smash that like button, subscribe for more untold histories, and ring the bell so you never miss a story that matters. Because history doesn't repeat, it gets uploaded, a tire, some petrol, a crowd. That's all it took to strip a person of name, of future, of flesh. But a single voice, yours, can be water on the wick. Carry that with you, every scroll, every share, every shout in a restless street. Remember the smell of burning rubber, and choose silence for rumor, courage for truth, humanity for heat. Thank you for watching.